This train was built for a World's Fair, and it's still running today. When you think about monorails, you probably immediately think about the Disney monorails. Or if you're a bit of a transit nerd like me, then you might think about Wuppertal or Chongqing's Line 3. But there's a good chance that you don't think about Seattle. Seattle itself is a very transit-rich city, from having one of the biggest ferry networks in the country to the construction of the One Line being the base of a future LRT network around the city. But Seattle is also home to a short but very influential monorail line. So let's take a look at one of the more overlooked transit methods in the Seattle area. The year is 1955, and while cars are the biggest transit craze around the country, there's also another transit craze that has the US in its grip: monorails. Places and people all over the US, from Los Angeles and Houston, and also a little-known eccentric theme park mogul, were falling in love with the concept, and Seattle was another place on that list. There had been plans as early as the 1910s to construct monorail lines in the city of Seattle, but these attempts had fallen flat. However, 1955 was different. Seattle had grown quite substantially, especially as a city in technology, as it was and still is the home of Boeing, and the city really wanted to put itself on the world stage. And in the 20th century, you really had two options on how to do that. You could either host the Olympics or host a World's Fair. And in 1960, after a few years of planning and preparation, Seattle was chosen as the site to host a World's Exposition in 1962. But even before Seattle was chosen to be the host of the World's Exposition, they had already started opening up bidding to companies on who was going to build the monorail line. Many companies made bids to build the monorail line, but the city initially decided to go with Lockheed. You know, the guys that make those jets. Anyways, after about a year of negotiations with Lockheed and some issues arising with the contract, including the Transit Commission not wanting to run the system after the fair, and the fair shortening in length from 18 months to just 6, the city backed out of the deal with Lockheed. However, another company by the name of Allweg International, which was best known at the time and even now for making the Disney monorail, countered this bid with a much more favorable one that wouldn't cost the city a dime. So, I'm betting which one you can figure out the city took. In late December of 1960, Allweg officially signed off on their final part of the deal. Construction of the monorail began in March of 1961, and the line was put together incredibly quick. I mean, they were on crunch time after all. They only had a year until the fair was opening up. Structural support for the monorail was the first part that was put in. It was all prefabricated in a factory in Tacoma and installed throughout the summer of 1961. The trackage for the monorail, otherwise known as a guideway, would be installed in January of 1962. The trains themselves would be pre-built by Allweg at their plant in Germany and shipped to the US, with only two trains being built for the line, the blue train arriving first in February of 1962, and the red train arriving a month later. Funnily enough, the system actually opened service to the public nearly 2 weeks before the red train would even arrive, as testing had begun on the blue line trains as soon as it was mounted to the guideway in early March. And on March 12th, 1962, about a month before the World's Fair started, service began on the Seattle Monorail. It wouldn't take long following the fair for the monorail to see some changes in its service of the city. Many people viewed the monorail terminal in downtown to be a blight on the city and wanted it removed. This would happen due to many issues that were occurring with the Pine Street station, and the station, after quite a bit of issues, was eventually relocated to its permanent home at Westlake Center in 1988. However, there was just a slight issue with the Westlake Center station when it first opened in 1988, and that was that the platform was just a little bit too close to the guideway, which, if you know anything about building trains, is a major issue. So the station had to be closed down for a few months for renovations before regular monorail service could begin at Westlake Station in February of 1989. Since 1989, there have been some upgrades to the stations along the line. In February of 2020, both stations created additional space in order to handle higher ridership numbers during NHL and WNBA games following the opening of Climate Pledge Arena. Alright, that's enough history. Let's talk about the operations of the Seattle Monorail. Unlike some of the other systems that I've talked about in this series, the Seattle Monorail only consists of one line with just two stations. With the starting point at Westlake Center in downtown Seattle, the line runs north for a little under a mile before turning east and arriving at the other terminus station, Seattle Center Monorail Station. The system itself operates with frequencies of every 10 minutes, every day of the week, with operating hours from 7:30 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Thursday, 7:30 a.m. to 11 p.m. on Fridays, 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. on Saturdays, and 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. on Sundays. These hours are regularly extended slated for events that happen at Climate Pledge Arena. For example, the Jonas Brothers will be coming to Seattle at Climate Pledge Arena in a couple of weeks at the time of this recording, and the monorail's hours are going to be extended from 11 p.m. to midnight that day. Pricing for the system is pretty straightforward, with tickets costing $3.50 for a one-way fare and $1.75 for a reduced one-way fare. There are currently no day, weekly, or monthly passes for the monorail. Only single ride and round-trip tickets are sold. You can, however, pay for rides on the monorail using an Orca card, which is Seattle's main method for transit payment on most transit in the region. To enter the train stations, unlike other systems in Seattle that use fare validators, the monorail uses fare gates to ensure payment before boarding. Time to talk about the rolling stock. The monorail currently operates and has been consistently using two monorail trains manufactured by the German company Allweg back in the 1960s. They were both designed to look very space-agey and futuristic for the time, with their aluminum design and bubble windows. You might be wondering how a monorail is powered, and well, the Seattle Monorail is powered by a third rail that's attached to the guideway, shown here. And I'm sure you're probably asking the question, how many Seattle Kraken fans can each one of these trains hold? Well, in terms of seating, there's about 120 seats on the train, but in terms of max capacity, the train can hold over 450 passengers standing. Alright, we've talked about the past and the current operations. Let's talk about the future of the monorail. There was actually a plan in the 90s and early 2000s to expand the monorail and give Seattle a whole monorail network. However, these plans fell apart due to ballooning costs. And with the creation of Seattle's One Line and the expansion of Seattle's light rail transit network coming in the next decade, it's very unlikely that we'll ever see an expansion to the Seattle Monorail. However, that doesn't mean that the existing line is going anywhere. This two-station monorail line actually turns a profit from its ticket sales and is incredibly popular for events at Climate Pledge Arena, as well as being declared a historic landmark by the Seattle Landmarks Preservation Board in 2003. It's unlikely that we'll ever see the removal of the Seattle Monorail. Seattle's monorail is an icon of the city of Seattle. It's definitely not as well known as the Space Needle, another icon from the world's exposition, but rather than just being a historical monument to the progress of Seattle and to the future of the 21st century, it also functions as a transit link for those who need to get between two neighborhoods in a city. It might be a bit of a relic, but it's still a part of a city that's truly seeing a renaissance of urbanism, and hopefully it continues serving the people of Seattle well into the future. But have you taken the monorail? Would you take it? How do you feel about the future of transit in the Seattle area? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you to all the wonderful people who helped me make this video. And a very special thank you to all of my patrons, especially Tony Stunts, who's in my Metro tier on Patreon. And if you really want to support my channel, go check out my Patreon. I release videos early there, I have a whole bunch of rewards for you guys, and I very much appreciate your support. Also, go ahead and check out my socials, linked down below. Thank you all for watching, and as always, I'll see y'all on the next one.